A very warm welcome to our principal, Brother Jerome, the headmistress, Mrs. Devaraza, teachers, my fellow students, esteemed tabulators, and our judges. We are honored to have classes of such caliber and expertise shaping our event. Your discerning eyes and keen insights add a touch of excellence to our proceedings. Thank you for lending your expertise to our competition. Your presence elevates the standards and we are eager to benefit from your invaluable perspectives.
Without further delay, let the eloquence begin. Brace yourselves for a showcase of wit, wisdom, and the wonderful voices that make this morning extraordinary. Enjoy the ride, my friends. The poem Try Again will now be presented by Class 6A.
Try again by T.H. Palmer. 'Tis a lesson you should heed if at first you don't succeed. Try again. Then your courage should appear, for if you will persevere, you will conquer, never fear. Try again.
Once or twice, though you should fail, if you would at last prevail,
Try again.
If we strive, 'tis no disgrace, though we do not win the race. What should you do in the case?
Try again.
If you find your task is hard, time will bring you your reward.
Try again.
All that other foes can do, while with patience should not you. Only keep this rule in view.
Try again.
Pied Piper of Hamlet by Robert Browning. Hamlet, Townsend, Brunswick. By famous Hanover city, the river Weser, deep and wide, pushes its fall on the southern side. A pleasanter spot you have never spied. But when begins my ditty, almost 500 years ago, to see the townfolk suffer so from vermin was a pity.
Rats! They fought the dogs and killed the cats, and bit the babies in the cradles, and ate the cheese out of the bags, and licked the soup from the cook's old ladles, split open the beds of salted scraps, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's tats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharp flats. And last the people in the body to the town hall came flocking. 'Tis clear our mayors are naughty, and as for our corporation, shocking to think we buy gowns lined with ermine for those that can't afford vitamin. What's best to rid us of our vermin? You hope because you are old and obese to find the furry civic robies. Rouse up, sirs! Give your brains a racking to find the remedy we are lacking. Or, sure as fate, we'll send you packing. And this the mayor and corporation, quick with a mighty constellation. And hard they sat in council, and then the mayor broke silence.
For kingdom I had but a big gown still. I wish I were a mile hence. It's easy to pick one trap once been. I am sure my poor head aches again. I have scratched it so and all in vain. Oh, for a trap, a trap, a trap.
Just as he said this, what should have at the chamber door but the gentle
Nothing like the sound of a rat makes my heart go pit a pat. Come in!
The mayor bride, looking bigger, and in did come the strangest figure. His clear long coat from heel to head was half of yellow and half of red, and he himself was tall and thin, with sharp blue eyes bleached like a pin, and light blue hair yet swarthy skin, no tuft on cheek
are painters and builders and live in a town not even a trace of the rats.
When suddenly, on the face of the Piper curve, in the marketplace, with a
First, if you please, my 1,000 guilders.
1,000 guilders?
the mayor looked blue, so did the corporation too. For council dinners they dared them all, with carrots, noses, with more, and half the money would replenish their sellers' biggest but with relish, to pay his son to a wandering fellow, with a gypsy coat of red and yellow.
Besides,
Oh, the mayor! Pick up the holding ring!
our business was done at the river spring. We saw where the ice the women sing, and what's that can't come to life, I think. So, friend, we are not the folks to shrink from the duty of giving you something for drink and a measure of money to put in your bowl. But as for the guilders, what we spoke of them, as you very well know, was in joke. Besides, our losses have made us thrifty. 1,000 guilders, come, take 50.
The Piper's face fell, and he cried,
No tripping. I can't wait. Besides, I promised to visit by dinner time Baghdad and accept the time of the head cook's pottage. All his riches for having left in the caliph's kitchen. Of a nest of scorpions, no survivor. With him I'll prove no bargain driver. With you, don't think I'll bet a tiger. And folks who put me in a passion may find me pipe after another fashion.
How?
cried the mayor.
Do you think I broke being worse treated than a cook? Insulted by a lazy rival with idle pipe and vesture piebald. You treacherous fellow, do your worst. Blow your pipe till you burst.
Once more he stepped into the stream, and to his lips again laid his fine pipe of smooth straight cane. And really two, three notes as sweet, soft notes as yet beauty and stunning, never gave the enraptured air. There was a rustling that seemed like a bustling of merry crowd jostling and pitching and hustling. Mortals were rattling, wooden shoes clattering, little hands clapping and little tongues chattering. And like fowls in the farmyard when barley is scattering, out came the children running. All the little boys and girls, with rosy cheeks and flexing curls, and sparkling eyes that gleam like pearls, tripping and skipping ran merrily after the wonderful music with shouting and laughter. The mayor was dumb, and the council stood as if they were changed into blocks of wood, unable to move a step or cry. To the children merrily skipping by, could only follow with the eye that joyous rout at the Piper's back. But how the mayor was on the rack, and the reverend council's bosom beat, and the Piper turned from the highest tree to where the Weasel rolled its water, right in the way of their sons and daughters.
He never can cross that mighty door. He's supposed to let the piping drop, and we shall see our children stop.
When, lo, as they leave the mountain side, a wondrous portal opened wide, as if the garden was suddenly hollowed, and the mother and master children followed, and when
sights they see, which the viper also promised me. Go on, let us. We set to a joyous land, joining the town and just at hand, where waters gushed and fruit trees grew, and flowers put forth a fairer hue, and everything was strange and new. The sparrows were brighter than peacocks here, and their dogs outran a fallow deer, and honeybees had lost their strings.
Alas, alas for Hamlet! There came into many a burgher's fate, a text which says that heaven's gate. Oh, to break at the easy rate, as the needle eye takes a camel in, the mayor said east, west, north, and south, to offer the vital by word of mouth, wherever it was meant not to find him, silver and gold to his heart's content, if we did only return the way he meant, and bring the children behind him. They made a decree that lawyers never should think their records taken duly, if after the day of the month and the year, these words did not as well appear.
And so long after what happened here on 22nd of July 1376.
And in better memory and praise the face of the children's last retreat, they called the Pied Piper's Creed.
But opposite the place of the cabinet, they wrote the story on a column, and on the great church window painted the same to make the world acquainted. How their children were stolen away, and there it stands to this very day. And I must not omit to say that in Transylvania there's a tribe of alien people who have strived their outlandish ways and dress, on which their neighbors lay such stress. To their fathers and mothers have imprisoned out of some subterraneous prison, into which they were trepaned long time ago in a mighty band, out of Hamlet towns in Brunswick land. But how or why they don't understand.
And you. The charge of the Light Brigade.
By Alfred Lord Tennyson. Half-fully, half-fully.
Half a league onwards, all in the valley of death. Roar the 600.
Forward the Light Brigade! Charge for the guns!
He said,
Oh, the white chart they made.
All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the Light Brigade. Noble 600. 1, 2.
That was wonderful, Class 7A.
The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe.
Hear the sledges with the bells.
Don't you dare let him know that she's as old as Billy O.
Jack led the old brown cow away and came back later in the day and said,
Oh, Mumsy dear, guess what? Your clever little boy has got. I really don't know how, a super trade in for our cow.
The mother said,
You little creep, I bet you sold her much too cheap.
when Jack produced one lousy bean, his startled mother turning green, leaped high up in the air and cried,
I'm absolutely stupefied. You crazy boy, do you really mean you sold our Daisy for a bean?
She snatched the beans and yelled,
You chump!
and flung it on the rubbish dump. Then summoning up all her power, she beat the boy for half an hour. At 10 p.m. or thereabout, the little bean began to sprout. By morning, it had grown so tall, you couldn't see the top at all. Young Jack cried,
Mom, admit it now. It's better than a rotting cow.
the mother said,
You lunatic! Where are the beans that I can pick? There's not one bean. It's bare as hell. No. You look up there. Look very high and you'll behold. Each single leaf is solid gold.
By Gorgons, the boy was right. Now glistening in the morning light, the mother actually perceives a mass of lovely golden leaves. She yells out loud,
My sapient souls! I'll sell the mini by a rose. Don't stand and give. You little clod, get up there quick and grab the load.
Jack was nimble, Jack was keen. He scrambled up the mighty beam. Up he went without a stop. But just as he was near the top, a ghastly, frightening thing occurred. Not far above his head he heard a big, deep voice, a rumbling thing that made the very heavens ring. It shouted loud, Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Jack was frightened, Jack was quick, and down he climbed in half a tick.
Oh, Mom!
He has.
Believe you me, I saw him, Mom. My visit froze. A giant with a clever nose. There's something nasty about it. He smelled me out. I swear it, Mom. He said he smelled an Englishman.
The mother said,
And well, he might. I've told you every single night to take a bath because you smell. But would you do it? Would you help?
Jack answered,
Well, if you're so clean, why don't you climb up the crazy bean?
the mother cried,
By God, I will. There's life within the old dog still.
she hitched her skirts above her knee and disappeared right up the tree. How would the giant smell his mum? Jack listened for the fee-fo-fum. He gasped aloud. He wondered when the dreaded words would come. And then, from somewhere high above the ground, there came a frightful crunching sound. He heard the giant
Majesty, without the giant smelling me. In fact, a part's my only hope.
He rushed indoor and grabbed the soap. He scrubbed his body everywhere. He even washed and rinsed his head. He did his teeth and blew his nose and went out smelling like a rose. Once more, he climbed the mighty beam. The giant sat there cross and mean, muttering through his vicious teeth, muttering loud.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. Right now, I can't smell anyone. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Right now, I can't smell anyone.
Jack waited till the giant said, then out along the boughs he crept, and gathered so much gold. I swear, he was an instant millionaire.
A bath does seem to pay. I am going to have one every day.
Television, I all done.
The most important thing we've learned so far as children are concerned is never, never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. In almost every house we've been, we've watched them gaping at the screen. They nod and stop and round about and stare until their eyes pop out.
Last week, in someone's place, we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor.
They sit and stare and stare and sit until they are hypnotized by it, until they are absolutely drunk with all that shocking ghastly junk. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out the windowsill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. But did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot?
It rots the sense in the head. It kills imagination dead.
It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes a child so dull and blind. He can no longer understand a fantasy of fairyland.
His brain becomes as soft as cheese.
His powers of thinking rust and freeze.
He cannot think, he only sees.
Alright,
You'll cry,
alright.
you'll say,
But if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain.
we'll answer this by asking you, what use the darling wants to do? How use they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? Have you forgotten? Don't you know? We'll say it very loud and slow.
They used to read. They'd read and read, and read and read, and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott, gadzooks. One half their lives was reading books.
Nursery shelves and books galore. Books cluttered up the nursery floor. And in the bedroom, by the bed, more books were waiting to be read.
Such wondrous, fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and maids.
And distant shores, where smugglers rode with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pond, stirring away at something hot. It smells so good, what can it be?
Penelope.
Oh, books! What books they used to know. Those children living long ago.
So please, oh please, we beg, we pray.
Go throw your TV set away. And in its place, you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. And fill the shelf with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks.
The screams.
And yes, the fights and kicks, and children hitting you with sticks. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they'll now begin to feel the need of having something to read. And once they start, oh boy, you watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They'll grow so keen, they'll wonder what they've ever seen in that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, foul, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, each and every kid will love you more for what you did.
For those who didn't listen,
And for those who don't care,
once more, we'd like to declare, never,
Never let them near your television set.
so please, oh please, we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, go throw your TV set away, go throw your TV set away.
If I were a voice,
By Charles Mackay,
if I were a voice,
a persuasive voice,
if I were a voice
a persuasive voice,
that could travel the wide world through, I'd fly
I were a voice, an immortal voice. If I were a voice, an immortal voice. If I were a voice, an immortal voice. We are the voice. We are the voice. We will be the voice.
Now, without further ado, let's invite our superior, Professor Sato, to present the awards and address the gathering.
Now, gentlemen, if I may have your ears, please. You have just seen, you've just heard practically every single one of you who's present in this auditorium speak. And all of you spoke as a group. And yet, when you go out into the world, you will speak not as a group, but you will speak as an individual. And all the training that you have received for this elocution, you will put into practice. Words have extreme power. Words have extreme usefulness. Words have a profound influence on each one of our lives in two ways: when I speak and when I listen. So I hope every one of you who has gone through the training of this elocution, who has gone through so many practices, that that from now on, the way you speak will be in a better way. The way you listen will be in a better way. So congratulations to all of you who have participated in this elocution competition. Congratulations to every one of you, because all of us, those who spoke and those of us who listened, we have all learned something. So now, before much ado, as we say, that we call out those who have proved that they have made a greater effort than the others. It doesn't matter who gets first, who gets second, who gets third. What we are complimenting is the extent of the effort that you have put in. I put in a greater effort, I improve in a greater way. So my prayer, my hope is that in the coming years, as you go through all these elocution competitions, that you will make greater and greater efforts, not only to speak, but also to listen. So, the winners from class 6A and class 6B, the class that has put in a greater effort, is class 6B. There are all improvers. So I see some youngsters doing that. Makes no sense. All of us are improving. Young or old. That is our attitude. Classes 7A and 7B. The class that put in a greater effort was class 7B. Class 8A. Now, among the overall, the class that put in the greatest effort among all the other classes, they put in the maximum effort. They were the ones who listened the most to the instructions of the teachers. The class that made the effort for the sake of all the others. And the class that made the greatest effort is class 7B. Right? Are we listening? position. The third greatest effort. It's a tie between two classes. And the classes are class 7A and 8C. Still some youngsters talking, please. I think, ma'am, the next time we have an elocution function like this, we will have to give marks also be cut for the behavior of the students. Remember, I have to give the youngsters who are speaking there every encouragement. When you talk, when you are whispering among yourselves, you are a distraction to the people who are performing. So as I said, what you receive is the result of your hard work. It's not a matter of first, second, third. It's a matter of the effort that you have put in. So congratulations to all of you who have put in an effort. Those who have not put in 100%, make sure that